This is a 2001 Rodeo. It's a V6, 3.2. It's four-wheel drive, 4L30E. Just bought this thing this week. The lighting situation here isn't the best right now. The audio isn't either. It's raining hard on a tin roof. So I'll try to get better footage of it in the daytime when it's not raining. But amongst the other things that's wrong with it, it had an engine fire. I'm not quite sure where it started. I think it wasn't an electrical problem. What I think happened is the fuel lines failed and leaked onto the manifold, and that caused a fire. The damage is not terribly bad. Let's see if I can get a light on this. It's mainly limited to the crank sensor circuit and the main positive, some grounds here, down there. The alternator has suffered. The GR valve is slightly charred, but I think it survived. I didn't take this off, it was already off when I got it, and I think the reason it was off is they were trying to get to that fuel line back there. There's some bolts here and hoses already removed. So let's see if I can get a shot of the crank sensor here. I don't think I can from here. It's in a kind of tight spot, but this is the wiring that goes to it, and it is charred. This right here used to be the wiring for the crank sensor. So that needs to be rewired. Let's see if some of the wiring for the alternator needs to be redone. Let's see if I can get a shot of that down there. Well, I can't see it really well. Fuel lines need to be replaced, and also these grounds here charred, and the positive goes from the battery to the fuse box. But aside from that, the electrical situation doesn't seem too bad. Now, this vehicle had several problems. I did hear it run before all this engine fire stuff happened, and it had a knock, which I'm quite sure is the timing belt tensioner, the hydraulic tensioner for the timing belt, but I'm not sure. Didn't really have a chance to diagnose it. And it has some sort of transmission problem. I'm not sure exactly what. It may need a rebuild, and if it does, we'll have to tackle that. But the game plan here is fix the electrical wiring and get it started. Once it's started, diagnose whether it's rod knock or the tensioner, and get that fixed, and then go on from there to diagnose the transmission. The dogs here are making a racket. Fortunately, there was no great damage to anything else aside from the harness and some insulation here. This hose here was just removed to gain access. It has the engine cover, which must not have been on it at the time, because it, oh yes, actually it was. It's charred back here. I thought it had escaped unscathed, but no, it did have some melting here, which is right about where the fuel line is. So that must have been here's another shot of some crustiness. A lot of the damage was also caused by, or maybe not damage, but the crud is from the fire extinguisher. They didn't wash it off after turning the fire out, so that stuff's corrosive and it's been sitting for quite some days, so it's got a layer of crud on it. So right now what I'm going to do, well, there you can see the fender liner melted. So what I'm going to do right now is spray some degreaser on this thing. See if I can get this out of here. Spray some degreaser on this, especially down there where most of the damage is, and hit it with a pressure washer. So when I can get to fixing the wiring and stuff, I don't have to deal with all the crud. I stuck a pair of earplugs in the EGR ports and just loosely put that hose back on. So I think that's what I need to worry about as far as water getting in any place. I usually wouldn't put degreaser on the alternator, but I'd venture to say that the fire and fire extinguisher probably have done more damage than a bit of degreaser is going to do. So I'm going to spray some water on here, put some degreaser on, and then spray it off and see how much of this crud comes off. Well, that looks better already. Oh, this headlamp, this strobe setting. That looks better already. I am going to give it another dose of degreaser and let it soak in a while and spray it off again. So while that degreaser soaks in, a bit of a backstory on this vehicle. My boss took it in trade for partial trade for a truck he sold, and the story was that this vehicle was imported in 2018. That's correct. I have the paperwork for that, and if I recall correctly, it had a bad engine, and this engine was replaced recently, but it was never registered, it was never used, sat around until what, maybe 6-8 months ago that my boss took it in trade. When my boss had it, it ran, had some transmission problems, I don't know exactly what it was, and it had the rod knock I mentioned before, or the knock I mentioned before, that I think is a tensioner. I drove it a little bit, but not enough to really know what was wrong with it. Then he traded it in for some tractor parts, and the person he traded it to was driving it. I don't know why, because he was told that it had problems, but he was driving it and it caught fire. So we don't know the exact details of the fire, but I don't know if it was a result of the fire or it was because the tractor parts didn't end up working for my boss, that he took it back. So it's been sitting for several months after the fire, and so my boss and I worked out a deal on it. So now it's my project to figure out. So that's a bit of the backstory on it. I think that degreaser is soaked enough. I'm gonna spray it off again. So now that it's clean and I got a better light on it, there's the crank sensor. It's definitely melted, and the connector's quite melted too. I think I have a spare sensor that we can use if this one doesn't work for testing purposes. And I'm not sure if I'm going to replace the whole harness or just from here up to where it's burned. I would be far more concerned about this if the source of the fire would have been electrical, because when you have a short circuit, oftentimes one wire burns way back into the harness and damages the whole harness. But in this case, the damage, where's my light? The damage ends right down there where the flames ended. The battery survived just barely. It's got a nice melted spot on the side, but it's not leaking. And this looks a lot better just with that wash. The earplugs seem to have done their job over there on the EGR. So I think the next step will be to take the battery out so we have a little more space. I'm feeling a little lazy, so these adjustable pliers will have to do. Well, if I had known this bolt was so long, I would have gotten out the impact, or at least the ratchet. I didn't mention it before, but I removed the, well, we'll have to find that washer later. I removed the fuel pump relay, and it does turn over. So the starter circuit is fine, so that's encouraging. And the battery still works. So the strap for the battery, the handle did melt off. So here's a better view of what's charred up here. So this one is the main positive that goes to the starter. This one is the positive that goes to the fuse box. This is a fairly easy replace. It just goes from here to the terminal just inside this fuse box there, fuse and relay box. I think what's melted here is just some protective sheathing. And then this over here is a ground that goes from the battery tray. You see, to the negative terminal, I think, over here. I think it's this one right here, I think. Okay, so I finally managed to get the alternator in frame here. I think actually the wiring may have survived. This is just a protective insulation there. These wires are fine. This is the positive that goes to the battery, and I think it's actually okay. It's got the corrugated covering melted onto it, but I think that'll actually survive, at least for test purposes. It will probably be a good idea to change it, because if it overheated, it might have lost conductivity. But yeah, from what I can see here, this is just pieces of that matte plastic melted onto it. It's not that the rubber itself is melted, although it is a bit charred here. But I think what we need to do here, basically, is repair this harness. Now, this is a shielded harness. You can see it there. But I think if I replace it with ordinary wiring, I should at least be able to get it to fire. I will eventually either need to get shielding tape or get a replacement harness, but I think we'll be okay for diagnosing. Okay, I'm not going to repair this now, but I'm going to clip this wiring here where I know it's good. So I have, actually I'm going to do it further down here to give me some more space. And we shall see. We shall see. I believe this is a shielded harness. I'm not afraid there. And it is. But I thought I had what I needed to repair this, but I don't. So I believe this is, let's see how many. It's 3 wires and a shield, but I'm not sure if the shield is just a tape or if it has an additional strand here. Yes, we have 3 wires and the shielding strand and the shielding tape. So here you can see what I was talking about before. This is in excellent condition. There was no short circuit damage here. It's all fire damage. So at least in this part, the fire was not caused by a short circuit. Now, one thing I want to test is, I think I'm going to reconnect the battery, and one of these is a 5-volt reference. I believe the other is ground, and the third is signal. So I want to check if we have that 5-volt reference here. Okay, so we have the battery connected, key on, and we should get 5 volts between ground and one of these wires. And there we have it. I'm going to put for low volts on there, 5 volts there, and 5 volts on this one. So I'm guessing one of those is 5-volt return. Yeah, I'm a little confused here. On this point, I'd have to check the manual exactly to see how this works, but at least DCM is outputting the correct voltage. So this is ground. This is ground. Let's check directly between these. Well, it would help if I didn't have my leads turned around here. That's why it's giving me a negative there. Okay, well, I have my leads correctly now. Had them turned around before. That's why it had a negative here on the 5 volts. So this is ground, as is the sheath, of course, or shield, and we have 5 volts. So that means the ECM is outputting voltage. So I pulled the destroyed section of wiring out. The plug itself survived. I mean, the outside burned off, but somewhere here, the shielding ends, because see, here we have just the 3 strands, and back here we have the 3 twisted wires. It's 1, 2, and 3, and this is the shield. You can see it's a different, well, I'm not sure if you can see it, it's a different color. So down here somewhere, I should get a knife instead of fingernailing this all off. Probably carcinogens and who knows what all else here. This is just for curiosity's sake. Yes, that's the end of the shielding. So the shielding ends, what, 3.5, 4 inches before the plug? Something like that. So we will either need to replace the whole engine harness, which I don't really feel like doing, or redo this with 3 new wires and some shielding tape. Now, I was proud of myself because I thought I had what I needed to fix this, but I don't. This is from my other rodeo, which got a diesel swap and lost a lot of sensor wiring and stuff because it doesn't need it. And this is a shielded wire, but it's just 2 strands and the shielding. So I'm going to dig around a little bit more. I thought the O2 sensors were 4 lines, and I thought this was O2 sensor wiring. I may have another piece of wire like this with the 3 strands and the shielding, but I'm not sure. In any case, if we don't and I have to repair it with ordinary wire, I can use either this wire and add one, or use all new wire and use this shielding wire and new shielding tape. So I'm going to try something here. I already started off camera. That's probably not the best idea, but at least I want to see if I get injector pulse. So I'm just going to wire in some ordinary wires into the remainder of this connector and see if at least we get injector pulse. If we get injector pulse and spark, which I'm not going to test for at this moment, then I know the fuel pump runs. So this thing should run. So here we have white with a blue stripe is connected to the red. And so, okay, this one is all white. It's got some blue on there, but that's because this one melted into it. So white with a blue stripe is this here. And I'm going to cut this really close here, crimp it on, and then I'm going to use tape to isolate. Remember, this is most certainly not a permanent fix. This is just diagnostic aid. So down here, all white is white. So all white is this one here. Gotta get this one a little longer so I don't get them all bunched up together there. And black is the green, yellow, whatever, yellow with a stripe. I'm probably partially colorblind. Okay, now we need some tape and see if we can get this plugged back in. Okay, so sloppy tape job later. There it is. I'm not going to entertain you with the details of trying to plug it in because it's very hard to get a shot of where it is. So I'll plug it in and we'll test for injector pulse. Okay, so we have positive there. So I'm going to assume, again, I could check the manual, but I'm too lazy for that at this time of night, that the injector pulse is negative. And we will soon test that. So now I've switched this to the positive. We should not have any lights on here until we crank it. Okay, well, maybe I spoke too soon about the battery because I tried to turn it over and wouldn't turn over and it's been charging. So I had to get another battery. So here we have the tester set up. An intermittent pulse on that light is what you should see. Of course, I can't see from inside, so I'll go crank it over and then I'll check the video and see what we have. Well, that was as shaky as can be, but I think I saw a flashing light. I'm going to change the setup here. Maybe we can get a better view without all the shaking. Okay, I want to make sure that what we saw wasn't it. Since this is not the steadiest setup, that something wasn't just touching ground. So we'll redo that test and hope for a better outcome on this one. Okay, well, there was definitely a pulse there. So that means if this thing were getting fuel, it would run. I don't have starting fluid. Let me see what I can find a substitute for it. See if we can get this thing to fire. Okay, after about an hour and a half's worth of contortions, a meter of fuel line, and 4 hose clamps, I think I have the fuel system to a point where history will not repeat itself, because I don't want that, at least not on my watch and not tonight. So I am going to go attempt to start this thing. The fuel pump relay is back in place, so we shall go turn the key and see if this thing starts. Let's see if we have a check engine light or not. We do, and I do not have a reader, but it's running, which is good. Well, it's got a flashing check trans light, and it's got a miss, which may well have to do with the EGR, but it runs, and it's not knocking. So I count that as a win. And it is past midnight, and I need to get to bed. But it's running. Well, I can't resist the urge to get that EGR valve back where it belongs and hear it run without the exhaust leak. And this is definitely not the correct tool for the job, but at this time of night, anything that fits is going to work. Now, I wonder what is causing the check trans light, but since we know it had transmission issues, I guess that's no surprise. But we'll get this EGR valve tightened back up and start it again. I should check if the alternator's charging while I'm at it. Well, I said it wasn't the correct tool for the job, and it most definitely is not. But the valve is back on, and let's give it a start. Well, once again, I spoke too soon. It is knocking, but it doesn't sound to me like a rod knock. It sounds to me like the tensioner. But at this time of night, that could be just optimistic thinking. Well, I think it's time to put tools away and get some sleep. Okay, well, the shots that I got before the engine running were horrible because I had it mounted here on the core support, and of course it moved all over the place. So I'm going to start it up again. It has a rattle in the muffler somewhere and it's knocking, but it does not sound to me like a rod knock. It sounds to me like a tensioner, but I'll start it up again. While we're here, I am going to check. Okay, I hear a spark arcing to ground, so we have a coil issue. I'm going to check the alternator and see if it starts. .85. So the alternator's working. I am going to turn off the light and see if I can see sparks. Well, as soon as I turn off the light, it stopped. This headlamp really irks me because to turn it off, you have to press the button 3 times. The last step is a screw. But it is sounding pretty good. Well, I am quite happy with tonight's outcome. It's running. Does it sound like rod knock? And the alternator's charging. Let's check the battery now. 13.15. So, I'd say that's a positive outcome. Now for sure I am going to put tools away and go to sleep.